Hello and welcome back to the channel. My name is Eddie Jennings from EJSLLC.com. This video is the next in my practice session series for the Red Hat Certified Specialist in Containers exam EX188. Before I dive in, I want to thank returning subscribers for watching another video, as well as invite anyone, if you're watching and you haven't subscribed yet, to click the subscribe button and ring the bell when you do. Also, if you enjoy the video, make sure that you do click like. Just a reminder that these are my practice sessions, so I'm going through the objectives and trying to either explain them or do examples of whatever it is the objective asks of you. They are not intended to be tutorials, nor are they intended to be training materials, but rather it's an opportunity for me to do a final review of the objectives before my exam, which is actually 1 week from today, and gives me a chance to see if I feel pretty confident about the objective or if I need to brush up a little bit in my final week of preparation. So continuing on with the Run Multi-Container Applications with Podman section of objectives, we're going to be looking at Understand Container Dependencies. And this is another one of these things that I think the intention is that we need to have a compose file that dictates certain containers or services as they're defined in a compose file. Certain containers need to be running before other containers are spun up. And that kind of makes sense as far as the idea of dependencies. I'm not aware of a mechanism within Podman that would have one container depend on another. There might be, and if I have some time for my last week of preparation, I might dig into that. But otherwise, I mean, the task of understanding dependencies is kind of an obvious thing. Let's say that you have some web application that needs to have a database backend. Well, if your web application your web container is running and your database container isn't, well, that's a problem. When you're running them, you need to make sure that they're both available. I do know, you have the concept of pods in Podman, and that, you can put containers together and you can start and stop the pod to where, those containers are basically starting at the same time. Perhaps that would fall under the idea of understand container dependencies. So I guess for some examples I could try for practicing this, we could work with a pod first and then work with a compose file. So let's see, we're going to do Podman create pod, and there should be Podman pod create, and we're just going to call it pod 1. Pods in this context, at least from what I understand, and I'm obviously not a master of this by any means, but I think of it as like a container of containers. I know when you eventually start working with things like OpenShift and Kubernetes, pods are a truly defined thing in those environments. And I think you can, like export stuff from Podman in a way that like Kubernetes will understand it. That is outside of my scope of understanding. And I think it's outside the scope of the exam as well. But for, running stuff locally, which is from what I gather from the objectives, what this exam is focused on, I think of pods as a container of containers. And that kind of makes sense because I think what makes pods special from what I remember reading is instead of like each individual container is going to have its own kernel namespace that has, its own siloed off little CPU cycles and network and all that good stuff. The pod itself is what gets the kernel namespace. And so therefore all of the containers in that are sharing that namespace. So kind of the container of containers. But anyway, we've made our container 1. We're just going to start just for the sake of argument, 2 web servers with this. So let's do Podman run. I'll put in the background, we'll name it web 1. We're going to be putting it into pod 1. One thing to keep in mind, I'm pretty sure with this, when you expose ports and all that kind of stuff, you have to do that at the time of creation of the pod. I might do another video focusing on pods. It's curious that I haven't seen any objectives that explicitly say, hey, do this with pods, despite Podman. But anyway, there's really no way for us to truly know what will be on the exam and until you take it. And of course, when you do, you have your NDA, so you're not allowed to share. And quite frankly, you probably wouldn't want to share because that will start to cheapen the value of the exam. But that's a whole philosophical discussion for another time. So let's do registry.access. redhat.com. I guess, from a lot of my earlier videos, I joked about if I would have this memorized by the time I get near the end of the series, and I think I'm doing okay with that. So HTTPD 2.4. I think that's all I need. Yeah. It'll pull down the image, and it should run our container. Famous last words in IT, right? Should. All right, we'll do the same for a Web 2 container, which of course just takes a moment because the image has already been pulled down. So I can do Podman PS, and we should see both of our containers. Let me clear the screen here and make the terminal a bit wider. Podman PS, I think you can do Podman PS. Is it pod or dash pod? Let's just try pod. Nope. There we go. Dash pod will give you the pod name and the pod ID that the containers are associated with. So if I wanted to, I could do podman pod stop pod 1. And if I do podman PS, we see that nothing is running. Podman PS -A, we see that we have our two containers. One thing to take note of with the pods is that it comes with a built-in container that its job is simply to sleep. That is this infra container, and if I'm correct, that is the container that is really like interacting a lot with your namespace that is the namespace for the pod. And so when I guess, maybe lack of a better phrase, traffic and such would be coming to these containers, I need to go back and reread that to have that kind of better in my head, but I believe it is what has reserved the kernel namespaces, or maybe made those namespaces kind of come into play, because namespaces are made and destroyed at will, is what like instantiates that names the resource namespace for the other containers to use. But that'll be something, even if there's nothing on the exam about this, because like I said, I don't think there's any objectives that explicitly say work with pods, but I think that would be a good thing just to have in your head. But that's what that container is. And if I do podman start, I wonder if I can just do podman start pod 1, or do I have to do podman pod start? Yeah. That would make sense. Podman pod start pod 1. If I do our podman PS, we see our two web servers, PS-A. We do see our exit with 1. Wonder why that is. I misspoke. I said, we have our web servers, or we didn't. We had the infra thing from the built-in container in the pod and then the other web server. Exited 1. Well, didn't intend to do this, but let's do a little bit of troubleshooting. Podman logs web 1. Okay, yeah, that makes sense. Cannot bind. That's curious though, because it didn't. It says TLPN. Nothing there. But you can go into the namespace itself and basically interact with the system as if you're in that namespace. The question is, do I remember how to do that? Hopefully I will between now and the exam, because I'm pretty sure that's a good troubleshooting thing to be able to do. ns-enter is the command for it. Let's see, podman PS. We have that. I'm going to inspect this container. JQ, we're going to look at state. So PID 4720. All right, let's see if I can remember this. So I really have to do this sudo ns enter. I want the networking. All right, let's take a look at man for NSN real quick. I think it's -N for networking, and then I think -T to, it's either -T or maybe -P to give it a process ID. So we'll just take a look real quick. These are all the different namespaces. Or is it NP maybe? No, T is target PID. Yep. And then N is the network namespace. Okay, so we'll do sudo ns enter -N-T, and the process ID is 4720. Okay, and my root, let's do sstulpn. Ah, there we go, and this makes sense. So I am in now the namespace for process ID 4720, which is the process ID for the pod, which the pod has created the namespace for all the containers to work with. And we see within the network piece of this namespace, we have something listening on 8080 and 8443. And so that would make sense why the other web server could not run and exited, because, obviously one container is going to come up just, milliseconds before the other. So therefore one already grabbed, or rather the Apache configuration for that already said, hey, listen on all interfaces on port 8080 and 8443. So therefore, when the second one tried doing that, it failed. So I guess a better example would have been do a web server and a database server, but gave a chance to do a little bit of troubleshooting. This, I'm really kind of off. I might have to name this video a little bit different than the objective. This is a nifty little trick, though. Well, not really a trick, but anyway, this is a nifty little thing. A lot, your containers are stripped down. They're not, I wouldn't even call it stripped down versions of an operating system as much as it is literally just the environment to run your application. And most applications are not going to need a tool like SS or like Top for that matter, because those are things for managing your operating system. You use SS, I think it stands for show socket maybe. But anyway, use SS to see what ports and such are listening on your system or are in use on your system, and obviously Tops for looking at your system's processes. So if you're dealing with a container that does not have a tool like SS available and you're trying to troubleshoot a networking thing, maybe someone messed up the metadata and had, expose port 5000, but the actual application that was built is listening on port 5001. Someone messed up the metadata there. Well, you can, but you're trying to connect on port 5000, nothing's happening. Well, you can then run the container, enter the namespace, and you can use your own tools on your container host, which is probably going to have tools like SS to do the troubleshooting there. So we can exit to get out of that. Look at man one more time for it. Yeah, run program with the namespaces of other processes. Yep, that's exactly what we did. Cool. All right, so that's our example there. I'm going to do podman pod rm -a. Oh, I have running containers. So podman pod rm -a -f, that's force. So that should get rid of our pod. No pods. And no containers. All right, so good. We're back to where we were. Now, the other thing I wanted to demonstrate was the using the compose with Podman Compose, and I actually have not installed Podman Compose on this yet. So we'll do pip3 install user Podman Compose, because it's not in the, I know it's an EPEL for RHEL 9. I can't remember off the top of my head. I know I mentioned it in another video. Its availability in RHEL 8. It may be an EPEL in RHEL 8 as well, but I don't have EPEL installed on this system. Okay, so let's do, before I do that, let me do Podman search, because I have not memorized MySQL, or the fully qualified image name for one of the MySQLs. It's the one we've used. I think it's this one. So I'll go ahead and copy that. It's been a few days since I've done any of my review videos. So it's a truly good opportunity to see what I have still left in my head. So tempting to do my dashes and dots, but all the examples I've seen don't have that for the specification. So service, and let's see what we'll do. So we'll call the first service web 1. I'm not actually going to give it a container name. The image will be registry.access.redhat.com/ubi8 httpd 24. And what do we want to do with this? I guess we'll do port mapping. Ports, just to practice doing that. All right, and we are going to make a service called db1. Its image is going to be that. We are going to need to specify some environment variables because it's not going to run otherwise. I think you can do env file as well. That is one thing to keep in mind as far as the documentation for the Compose spec. I'm not aware of any offline documentation that comes when you download and install, via pip. And I think when I did a test on like RHEL 9 installing from Apple, I didn't find any offline documentation either. So let's see. The first one we're going to do is MySQL user. That'll be foo. We'll do my SQL password. Of course, you would not do anything like this for production, but this is just for practice. Okay, and database foo. I think that's everything it needs. Okay, so I'm going to run this as is, and hopefully this works. See how well I have remembered things. Podman, let's see, up, and then, oh, is it service says plural? Yeah, that would make sense. Can't believe I did not remember that, or I can. We're human. I'm human at least. All right, now it's annoying me. So what have I done incorrectly? So the first one was kind of obvious. It's complaining about no services defined. Is it from image? That was just image. Web 1 ports. So what we're going to do is make this as simple as this could possibly be and see if it still errors. Okay, so it was something with the, I wonder if environment needs to be a list instead of just more dictionaries underneath. So we'll do podman down dash. I don't need to do dash D for that. Not podman down. What am I doing? Podman compose down. One little troubleshooting thing, make something more simple and then work with it. So clearly the first issue was I had services wrong. Oh good, I still had that on my clipboard. So environment, yep. Now this looks odd to me. I don't think this is right, but we'll find out. That's why we do our practice sessions. And that's one thing when you're working with this and you're doing your own practice sessions, even though, I'm a week away from the exam, don't be afraid to be wrong. Because oftentimes when you are wrong and then you figure out, how to fix it, that is really kind of a good test of A, your troubleshooting skills, and B, when you remember how to fix it, it'll often stay with you a little bit longer. I mean, there's obscure little things just through my career in system administration that I never learned from official training, and it's little problems that might happen one in the blue moon, but that little bit of experience is enough to let your brain be able to retrieve the information when you need it. All right, so let's try this. Podman compose up dash D. Yeah. Now this, I know that it's complaining about how it did environment. Maybe I had misspelled environment. I'm sure some of you watching are probably masters at writing compose files, and you're just yelling at your monitor from some obvious mistake that I'm missing. Also looking at my spacing, because in YAML, spacing counts, and you can't use tabs. Eventually I'll get around to customizing VI to do my tabs and spaces, but until then I'll just abuse my space bar. Oh, have we finally got something maybe? That's going to take a second to pull down that image. So that must have been what I did the first time. Must have had environment spelled incorrectly. All right, Podman PS, we have both of our things going. All right, so now to actually practice what I intended. So Podman compose down. Should tear everything down. We see the naming convention of the directory, the name of the service, _1, all that good stuff. All right, so let's say that this little web application, for whatever reason, if it runs and there's no database, it can't handle it. I mean, it can't say, hey, I don't have my database, and then keep trying, it just, you're done. So what you can do is add depends on, and then this will be a list of whatever services you're defining, which of course services are containers in this, that need to be running before this happens. So I'm going to put depends on db1. We'll save our file. Let's do podman compose up -d. Let me clear the screen first. Podman compose up -d. And we see that it ran the MySQL container or DB1 service. It ran that first, followed by the web service. I don't know off the top of my head if there's a directive you can get that's like, wait 30 seconds or whatever to start your container. There probably is something in the spec. I simply don't know it. But that is how you can control, or if your container depends on one another and you're using Podman Compose to instantiate your containers, that is a way that you can express dependencies. So going back to the objective, see, understand container dependencies. I'm looking at it from the application perspective, given the group of objectives here. I guess other container dependencies would be, you need to have a container engine, right? We're using Podman for that. And that container engine is going to have some type of runtime. Well, run C is what's underneath the hood for that. I know with Red Hat OpenShift, it's CRI-O, CRI-O is the, I say that right, the runtime for it. You have Docker as a container engine. You also have like all the LXC stuff, which that I have not touched before. Maybe I'll do that one day. But I think I understand, at least from the sysadmin perspective, about dependencies. And I think a couple of methods of grouping some dependencies together, you have your Podman pod with that. And if you're using Podman Compose, you can use depends on for that. So I think for the exam in a week, I'm pretty well ready to go with the container dependencies. If you enjoyed this video or found it useful, make sure you do click like. And again, I want to thank returning subscribers for watching another video. And if you haven't subscribed yet, do click that subscribe button and ring the bell. Thank you for your time, and I'll see you the next time.